I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of an overview of some of the other aspects of the path that we haven't really talked about yet. Not in detail, but they've come up in passing. And one of them is energy or Kundalini. Sometimes in meditation, the stages that we go through in meditation itself can produce these energy experiences or Kundalini experiences. But it's also part of our growth, part of our life. It's just our evolutionary energy. So this energy is unfolding anyway, but it's like meditation just sort of accelerates the process. So when we are meditating, we come to a place of single-pointedness, and sometimes these processes of mind will drop off. And with every dropping off of mind, there's a releasing or freeing up of energy. And some of the traditions talk about these stages. They actually have names for them, and the whole kind of meditation tradition itself, even the word meditation, is related to these stages of dropping off. So in the yogic traditions, the word is Dhyana. Dhyana is synonymous with meditation. So it's related to the word to burn up. So in Buddhism, the same word is jhana, which is, the jhanas are these stages of meditative absorption. So in that system, and I don't feel like there's any one map that is correct. I think there's a whole lot of phenomena out there, and then we impose these frameworks or like a lens to see it. So these different traditions have different lenses to see this phenomena through, but I don't see any one as particularly correct. Although I do like the one in Buddhism. I like the jhanas. I think it seems to me the one I always default to. It seems to be the most useful in terms of pointing things out. So even in Zen, the word Zen is just the Japanese version of the word jhana, or Chan Buddhism. The word Chan is the same meaning, the same word. So Zen itself is just dhyana or meditation, essentially. And it has a very particular ancient meaning to that word. So it's very non-dual in its actual meaning. And I won't get into that right now, but in Zen they say that the Zen is both Zen and not Zen. So anything you say about it is not it, positively or negatively. It's about direct experience. And so it's that direct experience we come to in meditation, starting to find out who we are beyond the mind and senses. And this energy comes forth. And every awakening experience, whether it's a stage of jhana, or whether it's what you would call a full kensho, there's some degree of activation or awakening of that evolutionary force inside of us. The two always go together, and the energy component is of the world of experience and form, whereas the actual recognition or awakening is formless. It's beyond the world of form. So, essentially, I think it can be helpful to put everything in context by using the idea of the Trinity, which comes up in a lot of the traditions. It's part of the perennial tradition. So people are probably familiar with the Christian Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is usually how it goes. So there's in the perennial teaching, there's sort of an archetypal meaning to this Trinity. So like many things in Christianity, the meaning is sort of encrypted again, and it can be understood if we kind of compare it to the Vedic or Hindu tradition. So the Trinity, I don't know if you've seen the statues of Shiva, and Shiva often is depicted with it's like a trident, and there's 3 prongs on the trident, and it's representing the Trinity. So they represent Purusha, which is analogous, you could say, to the Father. Purusha is just pure awareness. And this Trinity is really, it's really what we are. It's like when Jesus said, "I and my Father are one." We're all one. We're all this Trinity, but yet, we're individuals, but yet part of this greater Trinity. So Purusha is just pure awareness, the formless, the absolute. And then there's Prakriti, which is, you could think of it as the potential form, or you could say the animated form that comes into being. You could say animated spirit, so that would be analogous to Holy Spirit. To me, spirit is just the animating principle of the universe. So it's you could see it as the feminine as well, as the energetic, like the archetypal feminine or Shakti. So you have the Father, the Mother, which always gets left out in Christianity. So they make it more just like this sort of disembodied spirit. And then the union of those two is the, in the Vedic tradition, it is Ishvara, or, the Son of God, which it takes many different forms in many different traditions. But it's essentially the big mind, the logos, the awakening in form. So you have you have Purusha, you have the absolute awakening within form, within Prakriti. And another way of saying this is, it's a beautiful image in Tibetan Buddhism. They say the jewel in the lotus, the jewel in the lotus. So that jewel is the consciousness shining, and the lotus is, the flowering or the blooming of this human incarnation possibility. So growing that lotus is what this energy, what this Kundalini is all about. It's about growing this lotus. Often the Buddha is referred to as lotus-born, lotus born. So, so when our energy is no longer going into these conditioned patterns, the patterns that we just find ourselves in life, then we begin the growing of this inner lotus. And it can grow all through life as well. As we explore life, that lotus is growing. But we can get stalled out at different levels. Each level of energy is, it's all sort of evolving or growing from the lowest level, or you could say the gross, most physical level, to the subtle level. So, so in a very loose sort of analogy, it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy, where we're evolving or growing. As we go through our human journey, we move through these stages. At one end of the spectrum, we're only interested in survival. It's all just about the physical and survival. And then we start to, evolve. We start to explore more. So we explore relationships and jobs and start exploring different facets of life and different things. And then in Maslow's hierarchy, it ends at what he calls self-actualization. Which, in some of the traditions, like some of the Eastern traditions, like Sri Aurobindo is a good example. He sort of talks about human evolution, and his system actually begins where Maslow's ends, actually. So there's whole levels of unfolding and evolution that unfold after what Maslow calls self-actualization. So to me, there's this. I love the in the yogic traditions, like when they're depicting these chakras. The crown chakra is the 1,000-petaled lotus. And to me, it's like this infinitely unfolding universe that I think it has no end. It's kind of like a fractal that just keeps going, and we keep exploring these different facets of being. Yeah, so in life, we can be at different stages when we come to meditation practice. We can be at all different stages of the unfolding of that lotus. If we're attached to the phenomena that's unfolding at any particular stage, then we slow things down in our evolution. So, for example, if we're at the kind of the safety and security stage where, our main focus in life is survival, until we really get that, sorted out, and we're not constantly thinking and worrying and putting our energy into that, then we can't move to these different levels. But yet we can, the interesting thing is we can awaken at any one of these stages. So the awakening always happens in the now. There's no need for this, this development. But at the same time, when we awaken, it accelerates the development. It accelerates this growing of the lotus. And the more the lotus grows, the higher and more subtle it becomes, the more likely we are to awaken, the more permeable the self-structure is to that awareness. So there's a relationship there. There's a, it again always comes back to that always being Buddha, always becoming Buddha. Yeah. So, Yeah, so, some of the things that can slow us down, each of these levels as we explore, sometimes we get drawn to spiritual traditions as part of our exploration. And with that, we can sometimes acquire beliefs or knowledge from these different traditions. And sometimes this can actually be an impediment to our growth or to our evolution. If we take these beliefs and we add them to our self-structure. So one example is, from my own life, is when I started really getting into self-inquiry at one point. And I went into self-inquiry with all this Buddhist baggage. I went in and, I knew all the sutras and, I had all these concepts. But the concepts were impeding me from realizing what the concepts were actually pointing to. So they were signposts, they were pointers, but I was grabbing onto them as if there was some truth in the words or in the teachings themselves. So an example of that was the idea of anatta. So in Buddhism, there's the three insights. There's anicca, anatta, and dukkha. So anicca is, they're supposed to be direct insights into your meditation practice. So they're not meant to be conceptual and discussed philosophically. They're meant to be experienced directly. So when we go into meditation, we start to see, all phenomena is arising and passing away. So this is anicca. Everything is impermanent. And dukkha, we talked about, this inherent unsatisfactoriness that is in the conditioned self. And, and we experience that directly. It's not just a concept, but we can see it at work. We can see and feel the self-structure and that chronic unsatisfactoriness. And the other one is anatta, which was the really sticky one for me going into the self-inquiry, because I had experienced the first two directly in my meditation practice, but the third one I had not experienced directly. I didn't know what that, it's usually referred to as no self. So I thought I knew what that meant. I thought it meant there's no self. There's no me. The ultimate truth is that there's no me, which presents a clear problem going into a self-inquiry practice, because if you're inquiring into who you are, you have this deep belief that there's no self. So there's obviously going to be some friction there. So of course I was sitting in this meditation practice. It was the dyad practice, doing these dyads, and my ego, my self-structure was like, this is stupid. Like, what am I doing here? There's no self. These people are deluded. It's totally off track, and my ego was getting really riled up, and it was a real block. I almost left. I almost walked out of the retreat. And so it brought me face to face with this belief, or this baggage that I had acquired from Buddhism. And luckily the teacher he joked about it. He said, yeah, Buddhists are the hardest. They come with all this baggage, and you have to let that stuff go. And just keep going with the inquiry. Just keep going and don't, just find out. You have to find out directly if it's true. Maybe there is a self. Maybe there is, maybe you can find out who you are by doing this inquiry. So my, my little ego self was still grumbling, but I persisted with the practice, and I'm glad I did, because yeah, I realized it was just a delusion. And what they, when we conceptualize it or say no self, we think we know what that is. These words like anatta or shunyata sometimes is referred to as emptiness. But again, it comes back to what's being pointed to in the Heart Sutra. There's this deeper truth. There's this non-dual realization. So shunyata is not, it's not a thing, but it's not nothing. It's this, everything and nothing, non-dual experience that is possible when the little self drops away. And anatta, the Buddha, it's interesting, after my experience, I went back because I was curious about the sutras, and I went back, and there are some sutras where the Buddha actually admonishes people who teach no self. They would get it wrong. There's a lot of Buddhism today where they're teaching anatta as no self, but he would say, that's wrong. Like that's completely off track. You have to directly experience. We can't say there's a self or no self. You have to find out. It's in the depth of meditation that we realize this truth. So anatta, it's interesting, like anatta is, it's related to the word Atman. So Atman means the soul, and Anatman or Anatta is no soul. So it's funny because half of the traditions, half of the great spiritual sages say, anatta is it, and half of them say there is a soul. Half say atman, half say anatman. And if you really go into what they're pointing to, it's always the same thing. If they're true teachers, it's really there is a you or there is a something that remains when everything drops away, when all phenomena, all form drops away. There is something, but it's not a thing. And yet it's not nothing. So it's really impossible. Our language is dualistic and sets us up for these problems. And these problems go on through history, like these factions of these different religions go on, arguing about one or the other. And the arguments will never settle it because it's all conceptual. But we can find out the truth directly within ourselves. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an image that I really like, which it's a very powerful archetypal image that I think is useful for just feeling into the truth of this whole unfolding of inner energy and Kundalini. So in some of the ancient traditions, like in some of these really old temples, you find these statues of awakened beings, and they're surrounded by the nagas, which are serpents. And the modern Buddha statues that you see, most of them don't have any serpents around them. It's really these ancient ones that have these serpents, and the number of serpents will vary from tradition to tradition. You know, what it's really representing, usually these serpents are sort of at attention around the awakened being. So you see, you know, either a Buddha or Patanjali or different figures, you know, with these serpents around them. And you know, the serpent, like the tradition, if you try and research the Nagas, it's interesting. There's a lot of mythology around it, but they say that they come from the water. You know, they live in the water, which represents, you know, archetypally sort of the unconscious. So they're under the surface. They're under our consciousness. And these Nagas, you know, they're at attention, sort of serving this awakened being, the awakened consciousness. And so if you think of them as this representation of Kundalini, you know, all of this latent potential within the human being, you know, when that is fully expressed, when that lotus is fully grown, then, you know, all of these different facets of our being are serving that awakened consciousness. You know, so all of these different dimensions of self, you know, which were at one time just latent and unconscious, they come to fruition. And so, you know, we have these different facets of our being, and you know, within Prakriti, every being, every human being has its own sort of lotus, its own unfolding. So what those are different for different people. You know, so some people, you know, the full expression of their being might be through art or, you know, yeah, music or whatever it is, poetry or it could be through being part of a community or raising a family or absolutely anything, you know, or the full expression of, you know, someone like Ramana Maharshi. His lotus was very unique. He was just, you know, in presence continuously. You know, sometimes someone's path leads them to be that quintessential yogi in the cave, you know, but not everyone is that. So we never know, you know, how that's going to unfold, and it's the unfolding of that is just the exploration of life. You know, feeling once that energy is alive, that becomes our compass, and it's not that we have some, you know, some big purpose or some mission to fulfill. It's more like, you know, each self-structure, that Prakriti is like, you know, kind of like an acorn. Like, you know, an acorn is just, it's destined to become an oak tree. You know, our DNA is a certain way, and, you know, it can evolve and grow, and you know, like that acorn, you know, the tree is going to have a certain path depending on its environment. You know, if the acorn is on the side of a hill or something, it's gonna grow completely different than if it was planted in a valley. And the same with a human being. You know, our environment shapes the unfolding of that inner lotus. This image of the awakened being, you know, with the Nagas, you know, to me represents, yeah, just the totality of what it is we're doing here in meditation. You know, we're growing or evolving this self-structure into its full expression. Ishvara, you know, the one who, you know, we've been in the Heart Sutra. We've been talking about Avalokiteshvara, you know, which is an example of an awakened being. So instead of the Nagas, you know, I've actually seen an image of Avalokiteshvara with like 1,000 Nagas around, but often it's usually hands, you know, coming out. They're like helping hands because it's the bodhisattva of compassion. But you know, it can be expressed also in the female form. Kuan Yin is the Chinese version of Avalokiteshvara. And sometimes she's depicted on a dragon as well. So again, there's this connection to, you know, the integrated unconscious, you know. And she's riding the dragon. She's not slaying the dragon. She's got this power at her back. Yeah. So yeah, so I guess I'll leave it there. And I guess the relevance for our practice is just to understand what's unfolding, you know, that this is a life journey that's unfolding. So, you know, it's not like we just grow this lotus and then we're done. You know, it's like, like this is, you know, it's unfolding, and yeah. So, yeah, enjoy the journey. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you mean that it's just a part of the substructure, leave it alone and move on, and the search for I am. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean it's the full expression of a human life, a human journey.
The actual Kundalini.
Yeah, it's the whole possibility for the unfolding of the human experience. Yeah, so the more awake you are, the more it unfolds. The more it unfolds, the more awake you are. There's an energetic component to Kundalini. Some people will never feel that energy. But, you know, Kundalini, to me, it's not separate from your DNA, you know, from your you know, the evolutionary intelligence and potential in your being. You know, it's that spiral, you know, that DNA spiral. It goes from the microcosm to the macrocosm, you know, to the spiral arms of the galaxies. Everything is that one spiral. You know, it's the dance of the universe. So you're right. Some people will never feel, you know, that energy. They'll never have that energy activation. There are people who awaken. Like in Buddhism, sometimes they talk about the dry path, where it's, you know, it's possible through you know, just direct insight into your true nature to awaken and not experience all of that, the jhanas and the energy and all of that stuff. So yeah, there is a possibility of that as well. Yeah.
What I see is the outside, there is Kundalini Yoga session 1, session 2. So it become a business, it become a crazy going, and they don't know what they're dealing with. So once when they reach certain point, there is no connection, there is no direction, so they get lost. That's I just feel the discomfort of it. That's what I don't really care much, but it's just sad to see how things are going to that direction. So if something is special, okay, it's same print which we have, but when we start to focus on and put more importance into it, we lose it. So right, it's not going to be a flower or anything like that. It will be directing to the ego.
Yeah.
Sabotaging.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the trap. Like at any stage, you know, whatever unfolding is happening or whatever concepts we have about it, You know, it's like the example I used about anatta from Buddhism. It's just something I learned. So, yeah, people can go and learn about the chakras, and you know, they have names for them and everything, and they think it's going to be this whole concept, this whole progression that's going to unfold, and that's just a concept. You know, it's not linear, for one thing. It's not like it just goes from one to the other. You can awaken one chakra. You know, for me, on my own path, my third eye opened before any of my other chakras opened, and you know, it's you know, every tradition has different numbers of chakras, and different yogis talk about different phenomena. So it's never useful to just, you know, try and learn with the conceptual mind. We have to experience and find out directly how that's going to unfold for us. You know, sometimes it's interesting to see how it unfolded for other people. But yeah, it's just like everything else, like every yoga, every tradition. We can, if we get too into it with the mind, then yeah, it's just another ego game. Yeah.